Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's Tuesday, and that means it's time for another one of our ism segments. And today I'd like for us to consider one that you may not have heard of. It was coined by a Dave Tomlinson when he wrote a book with this same name. The term is post-evangelicalism. Post-evangelicalism. Tomlinson in his book argues that evangelicalism is a response to modernism, and that such a response does not match or fit the broader culture, that we're living in a postmodern world. And what you can see here, what you might suspect, is there's going to be a level of connection between post-evangelicalism and postmodernism, and out of that, a connection with what we used to call the emergent church. The emergent church has, by and large, submerged itself, as most of its more well-known adherents and leaders have sort of stopped holding on to any kind of evangelical bona fides. As someone once described it, they are now on... they're not a part of the church. They're part of Oprah Winfrey's traveling salvation show. We see that going on, and anybody that might still try to occupy that space is probably not identifying as emergent anymore. Well, post-evangelicalism is anti-evangelical and has its beefs against evangelicalism. I want you to listen to these and see if you can note a pattern. One of them, and I actually agree with this, they have a beef against individualism, which is a part of the evangelical church. That the individualist sort of looks at himself as the measure of spiritual maturity. It's the goal of the self, and they tend to have a very low view of the church. There's no real sense of corporate sanctification in the evangelical church. But now listen to the rest of these. Politicization of Christian doctrine. They don't like it that we've gotten political. Ethnocentric, especially Americentric. These are things they don't like about evangelicalism. They say that it's American-centric, that there's a bias in its theology, often in conjunction with nationalistic or exceptionalistic politics. A general lack of positive engagement with the social and natural sciences, music, art, philosophy, etc. So on the one hand, we're too political. On the other hand, we're too isolationist, I guess. Materialist and consumerist lifestyles, as well as a strong promotion of capitalist economics and neoconservative politics as a quasi-religious obligation due to the influence of the Christian right. Strong opposition from reformational traditions, particularly Calvinism, to developments in biblical theology, such as the New Perspective on Paul. That is, they don't like it, that Reformed people don't like the New Perspective on Paul. And finally, denominationalism and resistance to ecumenical efforts. Is there a common theme here that you can notice? Post-evangelicalism is a marriage of a subtle, weak theological liberalism with an embrace of cultural liberalism. At the end of the day, most of this list, again, I kind of like that first one, but most of this list describes ways in which post-evangelicals don't like the evangelical church in exactly those spots where the evangelical church stands in opposition to the broader culture. So we might say about the post-evangelicals that what they are cheese-eating surrender monkeys. If I can borrow a phrase from Matt Groening, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. That they don't like, the thing they don't like about evangelicals is that evangelicals are evangelical. That evangelicals take the Bible seriously. They believe in truth. They believe in justice. They believe in liberty. The post-evangelical, they want to believe what the world wants to believe while still having some kind of connection with the church. Why don't they just go liberal? Well, because that's a modernist thing too. So it is a postmodern version of theological liberalism, which has in common with modernist theological liberalism a disdain for those places in the Bible where the Bible speaks against the culture and an embracing of the culture. That's why I like that expression, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. If you're tempted in this direction, let me ask you to do two things. One, ask yourself this question: am I afraid? I want you to go and look at all of the warnings in Scripture about the sureness of the Christian-facing persecution and ask yourself, if I embrace the program of post-evangelicalism, am I in any danger of being persecuted? Well, the answer is going to be no. And then I want you to do this. I want you to ask yourself this question: am I willing to be hated by the world for Jesus? Stick with Him. We have been making our way through not only the Westminster Shorter Catechism, not only through its exposition of the Ten Commandments, but we have been spending quite a bit of time zeroing in on the Fourth Commandment, and you may have thought that we would have been done by now, but we come to question 62, which I believe is the last one. The question asks, what are the reasons annexed to the Fourth Commandment? Now, before I answer the question, let me see if I can unpack the meaning of the question itself just a little bit. The divines are asking, what has God added? That's what he means by what they mean by annexed. What has He added to the commandment itself to help us understand why it is that He makes the commandment? It's very important for us to always be willing and ready to obey God on the basis of His authority. God is that being which has every absolute right to say to His creatures, when we say, why would you have us do this, to say, because I said so. He doesn't have an obligation or a duty to explain His reasoning to us. And we have a duty and a responsibility to submit to His will, whether we understand it or not. But in His grace and in His kindness, He does from time to time instruct us in His reasoning, calling us to a deeper level of maturity. And so that's what's happening here in this question. What are the reasons annexed to the Fourth Commandment? The answer given is this: the reasons annexed to the Fourth Commandment are God's allowing us 6 days of the week for our own employments, His challenging a special propriety in the seventh, His own example, and his blessing the Sabbath day. So that's 1, 2, 3. What is it? 1, 2, 3 different reasons that are annexed to this commandment. Let's take a look at each of them in order. God's allowing us 6 days of the week for our own employments. This is important. We've talked about this in other contexts. We need to understand that when we give God 1 day in 7, we're not saying you are worth 1/7 of our week. That 1 day is a token. It is a symbol of all of our days. The same thing is true, friends, when we bring before the Lord our tithe. We come before him and we give him 1/10 of our increase. And what we're saying in giving him that 1/10 is all that we have and all that we are is yours. So God gives us 6 days for our own employments, remembering, of course, that all of our days are his, and so all of our employments are ultimately for him. We do our work as unto the Lord. We are stewards of the gifts that he's given us. Everything that we do is part and parcel of the building of the kingdom, even as I am today doing my work of putting out this podcast. This is part of kingdom building. But God is gracious and doesn't demand of us, I want you to devote all of your time specifically, directly, and immediately to me, and not worry about your own needs. He gives us 6 days for our own employments. Now, this second phrase, actually there are 4 of them. This second phrase is a little bit hard for us, I think, the language to understand. His challenging a special propriety in the seventh. His challenging a special propriety in the seventh. Well, it's, again, helpful for us because the Westminster divines put proof texts beside what they had written, and here they give Leviticus 23:3, which says, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, and holy convocation, yet shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. Basically, God's saying, this is mine. I own this. I'm claiming this. And I'm setting it apart. Fine. The third point is his own example, right? This is built out of the seventh day in the creation account, where God works 6 days, and the seventh day he rests. He sets an example for us and calls us to follow that example. And finally, he blesses the Sabbath day, which is part and parcel of that creation account as well. He called it holy. He set it apart. He blessed it. He claims ownership of it. Which brings us back to the message that I've been trying to get us to embrace the whole time we've been looking at this, and that is this. I don't want you to look at the Lord's day as some burden you're supposed to fulfill because God's really powerful and he's really kind, and we're supposed to honor him by doing what he says. That's not a terrible thing to do, but it's better to see the Lord's day as a gift from God. In fact, the word says that man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for the man. Let's enjoy it. Let's embrace it. Let's rest in it. This again comes back to that common message that I keep giving, that one of the ways we honor the Sabbath is we put aside our worries and our fears, and we just say, Lord, I'm not going to try and solve this problem today. I'm going to rest in you. That's honoring to him. That's setting aside a day of rest. It's acknowledging his ownership of the day. It's following his example, and it's receiving the blessing that he is giving. It's a bad thing to tell a lie. Generally speaking, we ought not to do it. Truth be told, however, I suspect we lie less often than one might think, and do more damage with the non-lies that we tell. For me to lie, I have to do two things. First, speak an untruth. And second, I must know that I'm speaking an untruth. It happens. I've done it. And will do it again, almost certainly. The great thing about lies, however, is that they can be exposed, which puts some restraint on us from telling them. There is, however, no such restraint when we are certain of our perspective. Often, however, our certainty outruns the facts. We accuse our brother not because we're lying, but because we're jumping to conclusions. And we're jumping to conclusions because we love nothing more than to judge our brother. We do not love our brother, but think evil of him. We assign motives we cannot possibly know, and having done so, we find him guilty, and then pass on our verdict to others, who convict on the basis of our testimony. People are sinners. We ought to know that. When an accusation is made, no matter how horrific, we stand ready to believe it. What we seem unable to believe is that a people who are bad enough to commit horrific sins are a people bad enough to falsely accuse others of horrific sins. When an accusation is made, the cry comes forth from the compassionate ones that no quarter should be given to the accused, because the guilty deserve no quarter. Those who raise questions about evidence are then deemed enablers, chiselers of the legal system, conspiratorial blackguards. You can always tell the guilty ones. They're the ones trying to stop the lynch mob. I have a friend who used to complain that in our day, conversation has devolved into taking turns sharing. You give your opinion, while I silently count down the seconds until it's my turn to give mine. When the third guy gets his turn, we move on to a new theme, but the same practice. Now, with social media, with instant communication, we all feel the pressure not just to have a take on everything, but to have one right now. Before witnesses can be deposed, before credibility can be assessed. The internet and the scandals it covers put us all on a jury. They demand of us a verdict, all while confessing that, sadly, a trial just isn't possible. Friends, we are called to be Bereans. We ought to be checking out the teaching of those to whom we give our attention. And we are rightly free to comment on public commentary. This kind of trial, however, comes with a ready-made system of evidence, footnotes. Just because you think someone said X doesn't mean that they actually did. Better to check your sources. But we're also called to be Bereans about the accusations we make or the accusations we listen to from others. We, friends, are called to practice a love that thinks no evil. We're called to be Bereans of our own hearts and of our own tongues. A rush to judgment is always bad judgment. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.